Throughout today's society of America, millions of people expect that trustworthiness are taken when relying on information discovered on the internet, and this common response is normally not acknowledged as any sort of ill concern to the public. Nowadays, it is considered to be more convenient when you're able to type or speak with a smart device to ask it a question, and its answer is usually credited as being persuasively correct. Like, for example, not knowing about a particular entertainer's birth date can be easily retrieved by a quick and easy Google search. Or maybe you're seeking your local 7-day forecast, and Siri conveniently reads it out loud once you ask. But then you begin to search for detailed information, and you need truthful answers to some serious questions you may have about a particular historical event that occurred during the late 1800s per se. Would you still rely on the quick and easy programmed answers that smart devices or search engines provide to you? Technology has evolved enough to where a person's inner abilities to think, read, and research for themselves are looked upon as some sort of nuisance. And that part should be left up to the most suggested theories that can be automatically generated from the internet by way of an algorithm system based on popularized information of the 1980s. Meaning, since it is more convenient to look up any information on popularized search engines, whatever information generated by these search engines is somehow credited as being truthful without any hesitation or room for questioning. What should make you wonder? Who gets to determine what information is generated, popularized, and displayed on the initial page of any search engine results? And since technology is man-made and humans do commonly make mistakes, are things that we were once taught to believe in error-proof? Like, for example, many of you were led to believe that all species of humans derived from the likes of monkeys, based on the science of human evolution and natural selection, when the creator of this theory, Charles Darwin, carried a heavy flux of racially motivated intentions and beliefs.
Since 1859, that's when Charles Darwin introduced origin of species by natural selection and the favored human races.
Celebrities do that shit.
Did you know that today they only report half the title that Charles Darwin wrote? His title had to do with favored human races, assigning supremacy to the Aryan race, all others being inferior. How many knew that? Only a handful. His book was racist, and that was the basic purpose for writing it.
Now, with that being said, should you take any works by Charles Darwin himself as being the truth? This is very essential to be cognizant of when you're conducting your very own research on a topic. This is also why I mentioned on numerous occasions that research is not just merely taking someone else's word for it. In fact, the word research is defined as a verb that means to search or examine with continued care, to seek diligently for the truth. What's very important to note here is that diligently is another way of saying carefully. And when you carefully research for the truth, it's as if you were carefully placing down something heavy. dangers could arise if you don't take your time. So, when you type something in a search engine on the internet and information is provided to you within seconds, would that be diligent enough to be considered the truth? Let's take things a step further. The most common human errors made when researching is their decision making, especially when clouded by belief perseverance. And here's what I mean by that. This psychological hiccup is known as confirmation bias in psychology, which is when a person is more likely to believe any information only if it confirms their pre-existing beliefs, and they reject all other information that goes against their beliefs. In the book entitled The Web of Belief, which was published in the year of 1978, on the topic of confirmation bias, authors Willard Quine and J.S. Julian stated, quote, "The desire to be right and the desire to have been right are two desires, and the sooner we separate them, the better off we are. The desire to be right is the thirst for truth, on all accounts, both practical and theoretical, and there is nothing but good to be said for it. The desire to have been right, on the other hand, is the pride that goeth before a fall. It stands in the way of our seeing we were wrong, and thus blocks the progress of our knowledge." End quote. So in other words, decision making is based on an intellectual judgment of an individual's perception, which can be vulnerable when invalidated beliefs play a key factor in how a person conducts research for the truth, and even more importantly, how a person narrates their lives. Some people can't mentally handle the truth merely because it overwhelmingly contradicts their self-concepts, narratives, beliefs, stereotypes, religious faiths, and even what they would consider being a fact. Nowadays, people would deem any sort of idea that they agree with as being a fact due to its familiarity or how the information that is given sounds about right from maybe an educator or some author of a book, which exposes the alarming reality of how easy misinformation can travel right up under our noses. A lot of misinformation can be spotted by diligent investigative researching. But before this research begins, you must first ask yourself the right questions based on critical thinking and what makes logical sense to you. Start with questions like, how does Dane Calloway know what he knows? And instead of prejudging me based on skin complexion or how I may pronounce the words I speak, take notes from my presentations of information, regardless if you believe it or not, and then begin to search for unbiased primary and secondary sources of the information that I present, regardless if it contradicts your beliefs or not. Now, this may seem time-consuming, and usually it is, but that's all a part of investigative researching. You just don't take anybody's word for it. You ask yourself, where did that information arise from? And then you go and find out on your own. Comedian, author, activist, and researcher Dick Gregory once stated that truth does not have to be validated by ignorance, which means that just because you don't know what I know and you continue to force yourself to believe in what you know without challenging it and properly researching it, and it may be the opposite of what I know, doesn't automatically mean that what I know is invalid and has no evidence to stand on. Throughout my years of investigative research, I noticed a common pattern of misinformation that is currently being credited as facts of American history by many of its writers, teachers, readers, and financial supporters. Misinformation lacks unmolested primary sources. And according to the University of Southern California, Primary sources are documents, images, or artifacts that provide first-hand testimony or direct evidence concerning a historical topic under research investigation. End quote. Now, that is very important to note because trusting search engine results that are filtered by tags from various websites does not equate to a primary source nor a secondary source of reliable information when researching a historical topic, simply because there's nothing historical about a website. Then it goes on to state that primary sources provide an unfiltered view of the past, and in doing so, offer personal, unique, and more complex insight into the period being studied. Instead of viewing history as a list of dates and facts, primary sources provide the original artifacts of historical interpretation. End quote. Examples of primary sources are diaries, photographs, illustrations, maps, newspaper articles from the time period, manuscripts, pamphlets, posters, autobiographical materials, interview or speech transcripts, oral histories, audio recordings, video recordings, films, congressional records, and government documents like census records, acts, laws, treaties, and bills. Now, it is not impossible to find the truth by using the internet. However, researching is a lot more time-consuming than just a quick Google search or accepting the narratives of Wikipedia articles that were written by strangers. The solution to pinpointing what is truthful information and what is misinformation can be accomplished by you knowing anything that is easily accessible is questionable.